connectionslab.org. Welcome, and tonight we'll take a look at common framing mistakes. Some mistakes are built in, some are in how we approach messaging, some actually help the GOP, and some are our own organizational issues. I want to start with built-in mistakes, mistakes that are not your fault or anyone's fault, the ones that are built in through evolution. I'll begin with a reading from Kim Stanley Robinson from a book called The Ministry for the Future, out this year. It's a book about climate change and what the near future could hold in terms of how things might play out in the 2030s. It's a speculative fiction novel. Kim Stanley Robinson is one of the top science fiction writers and speculative fiction writers out there. He begins this way. Just as we are all subject to some perceptual errors due to the nature of our senses and physical reality, we are also subject to some cognitive errors built into our brains through the period of human evolution and unavoidable even when known to us. The perceptual illusions are easy. There are certain patterns of black and white that when printed on a paper circle and the circle then spun on a stick, the paper will flash with colors in the human eye. Slow the spinning down and the printed pattern is obviously just black and white. Speed it up and the colors reappear in our sight. It's just the way it is. Everyone can accept these optical illusions when they are demonstrated. They are undeniably there. But for the cognitive errors, it takes some testing. Cognitive science, logicians, and behavioral economics have only recently begun to sort out and name these cognitive errors, and disputes about them are common. Unavoidable mistakes have been demonstrated, and Robinson continues, as with perceptual illusions, knowing that cognitive errors exist doesn't help us to avoid them when presented with a new problem. On the contrary, these errors stay very consistent in that they are committed by everyone tested, tend toward the same direction of error, and are incorrigible in that knowing about them doesn't always help us avoid them, nor to distrust our reasoning in other situations. We are always more confident of our reasoning than we should be. So I thought I'd bring that up because I kind of liked it, because this is really where we're at. The human brain has evolved for one simple reason, to keep you alive long enough to reproduce. Everything else is extra, bonus. And but it is built in a way, kept us alive is not necessarily rational, but it kept us alive. So I like the way he put this. And we've been over some of these cognitive biases before, and this in other webinars. I'm not going to go deep into them here. I'm just mentioning that is the kind of error that is easy to make, no matter who we are, no matter how much we study this. The more you read, you realize that we're victims of all of this. Or beneficiaries. I mean, we're all still alive. That's something. Closely related to cognitive biases or errors are logical fallacies. And that's when attempting to reason, the rules of logic are misunderstood or disregarded, resulting in faulty arguments. And an example would be the false clause, the presumption that a real or perceived relationship between things mean that one is the cause of the other. I'll show you an example here, one of my favorites. This is the we need more pirates graph. And so here it is obviously clearly shown that as the population of pirates has decreased over the last 200 years, the incidence of global warming has increased. So obviously we need more pirates. So this is a great example of a logical fallacy. Another one, my favorite, that a high school chemistry teacher gave me is, he said, pickles are deadly. Everyone who eats them dies. Of course, maybe not right away, but of course they die. So therefore pickles are deadly. So these logical errors are more common than you'd think. You can witness these pretty much every day on Fox News. They're actually quite expert at the logical fallacies. I'm pretty sure that they have studied them in depth and have them right there on their desks so they can pick whichever one they need to spin the truth into lies. Which brings us to propaganda, which is not necessarily a cognitive error because it is on purpose. So someone is, like Fox News is intentionally trying to mess with people's heads, and in that they will look not only at logical fallacies, but they'll look at that whole giant wheel of cognitive errors to see how they can wedge some kind of lie or misdirection into their messaging. So it's I suppose the only cognitive mistake you might say about propaganda is that the mistake could be in not figuring out that you're being propagandized upon. So here's another way of or another way of thinking about errors. These are mistakes of approach, is what I call them. And when we sit down or whenever we begin to message, there's a process to it, and there are also errors that we make. And most of you know, because you've been here before, that obviously if you don't message from science, if your message is not informed by the psychology of how humans really think, it will be weak or ineffective. Worst case, it'll hurt us. So I'm going to put on this. Here's a quote from somebody most of us know now, Antonia Scatton. She says, "The public debate is not so much an argument as a contest of association. Our opponents want inflation to be associated with Biden and public speaking. We want inflation to be associated with frames like crisis profiteering and price gouging." So this is all about making repeated associations in people's brains. If you studied learning theory, you know that it is all about associations. And doing this by repeating associations between issues out there and our values, we can make our worldview dominant again. We want to build these associations so they are the first thing people think about. And this is essential to our messaging and leads to strategic dominance over time. Obviously, this is exactly what the Republicans have done, and they're very adept at it, and they are well-funded, and they just go at it every minute of every day. You can almost see the smoke rising from Fox News when Trump comes out and says something stupid, and they're in there trying to spin it. Another error of approach is not having a coherent idea of the democratic worldview. Most liberals can barely tell you what a liberal worldview is. However, the liberal and conservative worldviews are well defined and couldn't be more different from one another. We go into this a lot more deeply in our workshops, and we talk about it in amongst all of the webinars we do. But I'm going to give you another way to look at this. The whole idea of a spectrum is just wrong. It's a weird way to look at things, left and right and the rest. What we've got are collections of values and policies. And here I've got progressive, liberals, and conservatives. And moderates, for example, or as I've said before, there is no definable moderate worldview. I've yet to have anyone describe it other than to say people should compromise, which isn't a worldview, it's just being an adult. And really, I see it as this Venn diagram. And what it means is that in practice, this concept of moving to the center, because there is no moderate worldview that you can get, all that means is you're going to pick up some conservative values, some conservative policies, and that makes you a moderate. And so, think about that, the self-defeating aspect of thinking that we're going to move to the middle and where that's going to get us. The more of these conservative policies that we pick up and hopefully not along with their frames, the closer we get to just being more like them. And so it's this, I think, is an error in how we think about liberals and conservatives and what our response is to it. And I'm not faulting candidates. You know, I've watched candidates work. I don't want to do all that work. And I sure get it that they want to win any way they can. It's not their fault that we as Democrats and as a movement have not done the work that we've needed to do to make our ideas dominant like they once were after FDR, after LBJ. One thing we can say is watching what Joe Biden has done pretty much by the facts of what has been passed here during his basically first year and a half of office. It's the most progressive and the most successful bunch of legislation since the New Deal. And if you're not buying that, then at least since LBJ's Great Society. This is what we need to crow about. Anyway.
George, can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
So I'm looking at this Venn diagram, and I know things that a saying that people have said for years that I've heard is, I'm socially liberal, but fiscally moderate. And I'm wondering, looking at this Venn diagram, is like, can you be socially liberal? I mean, you can be. I suppose that means around gay marriage and those types of things. But then you like go more toward the conservative viewpoints than of how to spend money. And I just don't know. Is that like, how do those work together?
It's absolutely possible. There used to be a brand of Republicans who were socially liberal and fiscally conservative. And they actually had, they were here where we are, our former Congressman Jim Ramstad here was a perfect example. He was very supportive of mental health. He's very supportive of social services, very supportive of, a number of things on our that we would traditionally consider to be democratic ideals. However, he was fiscally conservative, and what those Republicans defined as fiscally conservative is, well, we think the government should do less, but what the government does, it should do very well. So the things we fund should be things that are going to be successful and work. I mean, I may be overselling these guys, but many of them really believe this. So that Venn diagram would shift maybe more towards, for those folks, the red and the blue circles would come together more in the middle, and that so-called moderate worldview or moderate area would increase. But again, they are choosing policies from each. There is not a separate worldview in the middle that is a collection of its own unique value sets and policies. So just a way of looking at it. So I think this is, having a good coherent idea of the worldview also really means getting to know what Democrats believe. And we've done in our workshops, we talk about this, and we have a list of values. At least if you'll remember to link to those in the follow-up. And that will give you some idea of what's going on. But we do go over this a little more detail in our workshops, and we can get some of that information out to you. But knowing what a liberal is basically comes down to the values of empathy, the values of empowerment and protection. These are very strong. And the basic difference is that conservatives don't believe government really should do very much of anything. The only thing it should do is protect us. We think that the government, yes, should protect us, but also the government is our tool to accomplish the things that we want to accomplish. In a democracy, that government belongs to us. We just send people there to represent us. They don't own it. It's not theirs. It's ours. And if we decide we want to do something, like everybody gets health care, we get to do that. And if some people don't like it, tough nuts, So it's just a different way of thinking about things. And again, that's a much deeper subject, but we will go into that. After the election, we'll probably hold another workshop. And if you haven't been to one, it'll give you a really, really good picture of not only what liberals believe, but also conservatives, how that all fits together and how you can make messages. Another error of approach is not knowing your audience. And this should always be something you do when addressing a group. You need to know who they are and what they care about. And if you don't know, it's just fine to ask them. if you find yourself in front of a group of people. See what, or if you're at, dinner with, or Thanksgiving dinner with your crazy Uncle Frank, you can certainly ask him. And, but when you do this, you have to be careful, because most people on our side believe that there's a magic bumper sticker. We've talked about that before. It's the one message to unite them all, right? And our message should evoke liberal values that are of interest to the audience you are speaking to. This means you will have more than one message on any policy. If you're talking insulin pricing to a diabetic, you might speak of the benefit that a $35 cap has on their budget. To a small business person, you might say this is another way to reduce the cost of health insurance. So it's just the main point being that you might have more messages than one. There isn't really a holy grail message that, you have to tailor it to your audience and think of it in more dimensions, those dimensions matching the needs of the person that you happen to be speaking to. Another error of approach is not realizing you are in a Republican frame. Republicans are masters of choosing the frame of a debate to pull us off the real issue. They talk cost when speaking about the climate crisis, and sometimes we argue with them about cost. But is cost really what we should be arguing about? Or is the important thing the health of people and all other life on this planet now and in the future by avoiding the ongoing destruction of our climate? So it's, thinking, being aware all the time and being on guard when you're discussing any issue. Are you in a Republican frame? It's very easy to slip into them. I'll give you another example of one that is very prevalent right now. Why in the world is the Inflation Reduction Act called a spending bill in each one of these news stories and in all the other ones I looked at? Now, I do understand that it was passed during reconciliation. I do understand that it has to do with money and that this is a common term for this. But notice that it's the dominant term. I mean, spending, well, sure, but is the whole purpose of the bill to spend money? The purpose of the whole bill is to have corporations pay their fair share, to have real climate solutions, at least a good start on that. We haven't had much of anything, or Medicare drug cost reduction. That's the real thing. And I think in this case, the media should also be calling it what it is named, the Inflation Reduction Act. Certainly, we should do that all the time and make sure we're talking about all the things in this bill and the previous ones that have been passed. There are some really wonderful things in there. I mean, this is great stuff. The more you read them, the more ammo you'll have when you're talking with people to talk about all of the ways that their lives are going to get better. Other quick examples are natural gas or clean coal, both, chosen to fool people into thinking that dirty fossil fuels are not. Tax relief rather than investment. Rapists, murderers, criminals rather than refugees or people who enrich our country. So that's important to make sure we're not in the frames the Republicans have for us. And I will break here in just a wee bit, but there's a lot to cover, so I want to make sure I do that. So write your questions down or stick them in the chat. Another problem of approach is not having a frame. This is actually really common, and this is the hardest thing to do. And this is what we train people to do, is to practice this so that you remember that when you're making a message, you need to put it in a frame. And we'll also link to a document in the follow-up that we've been working on here in Minnesota that has frames for the general democratic worldview and also other frames for issue areas. It was actually intended as a companion to our state party platform here, which is usually a list of what's with no whys. It's like, well, we want this act to pass. We want, these things to happen. And there's nothing said about why these things are there, not in the platform. So this was intended as a companion document, but also happens to cover most of the main issues out there. So this may be something you can use. Feel free to send it to your own state party's platform committee. We have sent this out to Wyoming, and they have used some of it. So anyway, lastly, a sure way not to have a frame is to focus on facts and logic, which is what we do. That's why this is the hardest thing. I'll have an example coming up about that, but this idea of just throwing facts at people and expecting them to reason to the same conclusion we have is absurd. If you know how psychology works, if you know about the cognitive errors and all the rest, you'll know that that is going to be very, very rare that is going to work. And so, okay, another error of approach is being defensive. And we've talked about this before, but I thought I'd throw it in here because, again, our good friend Antonia Scadden has a great
George.
Yes.
George, are you advancing your slides? Am I the only one not seeing a change here?
Well, okay, did it just change for you?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have I don't have slides for the whole thing.
Okay.
I've got,
okay. Thanks.
Oh, indeed. Thank you. It's nice to know if things are happening or not happening. But Antonia has a Substack. Lisa will get you a link to that. And one she wrote recently is the unintended consequences of defensive messaging. And she says, the first problem with defensive messaging is that it keeps the attention of the public debate focused on your opponent's frames. The second problem is that we often try to beat people on their own terms by saying, even if that is what you believe, we still think our position is the right one. This has the unintended effect of validating all or part of their original claims, not from a logical perspective, not from a fact perspective, but by simply drawing attention to it. Sorry, that was my own parenthetical remark. Antonio goes on to say, in the public debate, efforts to show that you appreciate the other side's position don't make you look reasonable, they make you look weak. Anybody who's been in rhetoric or debate club knows that kind of statement is never made there. They want you to acknowledge your opponent's position. You don't want to do that. Antonio says, they make it look like you have doubts about the rightness of your own position while validating the core premises on which your opponents are basing their argument. We need to focus on clearly communicating what we believe to the public rather than trying to get our opponents to admit that they are wrong. And I think that pretty succinctly shows why defensive messaging, which is, every time you go on Facebook or Reddit or wherever you go to opine, this is pretty much what we do. Well, you're just crazy. That's not right, what you're saying. We need to stop doing that. Here's something that we've been talking about a little bit here in the last month or two that's really important. And this other approach is error is not being on the offense. But we want to make our messages in a way that the GOP has to respond to us so that they feel they have to move left to win. You may think that sounds impossible, but there is a way to do it. Again, from Antonia's Substack, she says that attack equals attention. We tend to scrupulously avoid being attacked. This is one reason why we struggle to control the agenda of the public debate. When you say something non-controversial, such as Joe Biden has created a lot of jobs, the response is, okay, fine, and on to the next subject. Conservatives draw attention by saying things that are designed to provoke us to respond. And we do just that, keeping the topic on the front burner. This means that their messaging, no matter how absurd, dominates the brain share of the American public. We have to say things that are true, that are morally right, and controversial in the context of our current public debate. When conservatives then attack our position will become the subject matter of the debate. The longer they continue to attack us, the more they continue to respond to us, the more brain share our frames will get. Example, you can say Republicans are making the climate crisis worse. It's okay to just say that. That's what's going on. or Republicans have taken control of women's bodies. Okay, now those are arguably inflaming types of or very certainly very direct kinds of messaging. But Antonia goes on to say, we don't have to even make controversial claims. We can pull a Tucker Carlson and merely ask the question, as in, does this law mean that women will be put in jail for having miscarriages? Let conservatives explain how that's not going to happen. Controlling the debate is not about saying things that everybody agrees with. It's about drawing the right kind of fire. Again, I think Antonia is an absolute genius, and quoted from her quite a bit tonight. So the last one is called Answering Questions, which is great because I'll break for a question session here. And this is a problem of approach in that we sometimes answer questions that are put to us that doesn't really do us any good to answer. And some people who've read Al Franken's, number of Al Franken's books, when he got to the Senate, he came back from a meeting and his staff was just shaking their head and looking at him like, somebody died. And he goes, what? And they said, you answered their questions. He goes, well, they asked the questions, and aren't I supposed to answer them? They go, no. Their questions are designed to keep you from being in your frame. So they said, you don't want to answer. And so the point of this is you're under no obligation to answer your opponent's questions, or even an interviewer's question if you don't like the question, or if that question isn't going to help you. Use the few precious moments you have to make the messages you want to make. If the question or statement leads somewhere you don't want to go where you want to go and say what you want to say. It's called the pivot. So anyway, I threw a lot at you right there. Sorry about that. I do want to make sure we get this stuff done before we go, before 8 o'clock. So questions, anyone? And I suppose I could see them here if I pop the chat up and try to fit it on my tiny, tiny screen. All right, let me go through up here at the top.
There's no questions in the chat right now. So does anybody, if you have a question or a comment or anything, just go ahead and start talking.
I do notice that Sue Durgan's asked book and author. It's Kim Stanley Robinson and the Ministry for the Future. And below that in the chat, I'm not surprised at all that Hobie's already half done with it. And Deb Carson's too. All right. Oh, and Lisa's answered the question. Yeah, the GOP spends like crazy. They're not fiscally conservative. Ginny, you're right about that. What's interesting is that they used to be somewhat more responsible with money. Now they're completely out of control and have been for probably 30 years. And so their messaging, they still keep that and all that.
But doesn't that statement, George and Virginia, by itself validate that we need to be fiscally conservative as opposed to, taking care of each other?
We just, we need to stay out of the frame that it's all about money.
Yeah.
That's the whole deal, talking about that whole deal where, and I've done it myself, if you go back and look there, dear Republican friend, you will see that whenever Republicans are in office, they spend way more than we do. But, now there's a fact that's not helping. What really helps is to go and say, you know what, again, we the citizens own the government. We have every right to decide for ourselves how we want to empower ourselves, how we want to do things that make our lives better, to provide for the common defense and the general welfare. We make those decisions. We can, and the things we're deciding to do are things that people want. You ask people on most of these issues and they're with us. So we can tell you about all those wonderful things we do. If you've got a moment, I'll buy you a beer. Something along that.
George?
Yes.
Ginny has a question or comment.
Ginny?
I just I've been writing postcards for someone in my my house, the Minnesota House, and the previous election cycle, I was doing writing for the Sierra Club, and I know that everybody here probably does all kinds of stuff. But with the Sierra Club, they gave us kind of a framework, but they wanted us to speak on our own words and try to about, what we were passionate about. Now, this particular candidate wanted me to write exactly what she had said. They gave us a script and I had to write that on the postcards, and it was okay, but it just didn't feel like it really had any passion. So I was just wondering what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, it's kind of hard. I think this can get better over time if we train our candidates and our electeds and choose candidates who get this. And so that, a comment by you that, well, what I like to do is tell people why I care about this issue and why this policy solves problems for people. And so are you all right with me doing that rather than following what's on the script? And, the problem, again, the candidates are not at fault here, but because a lot of them don't know this stuff, they aren't thinking about it. So they aren't thinking that's a possibility. They're probably thinking they're helping you by saying, here, write this down.
Right. I just thought it was, I was thinking about your, workshops and things, and I was like, oh my gosh, I really should talk to her about this, but I thought it might be kind of, I don't know. I just thought, just go with the flow and do it. But it seemed kind of like, oh my gosh, it just seemed like such a cookie cutter thing. And if I got that postcard and read that, I would like, well, this just sounds canned,
Yeah.
even in my handwriting, but you can move on. I don't mean to monopolize the conversation. Thanks, George.
One last thing about that is if you were to talk to her about it by providing her with a message that did those things and saying, here's the kind of things that I like, then they might decide that that's a good one that people can use too. And a lot of this is because a lot of volunteers certainly have no training in this. And they know that people are nervous about it. So by giving them something they can write down, it's easier for people to blow through a lot of postcards without having to think stuff up. So anyway.
Sure. Thank you.
Dave.
Yes, we have an interesting situation here in Red Wing. Some of you may remember, have read that a year ago, the MAGA crowd here was trying to recall the entire city council because the city council fired the who basically wasn't doing his job and was fired for that reason alone. But it turns out he was a strong Republican and had a lot of friends who wanted to get revenge. Well, in the process of attempting that recall, which went pretty much nowhere, although they got a lot of noise and press, they created a lot of incivility in town. There were many negative letters to the editor. There was much incivility on Facebook. Well, they have now, of course, they're all running for office now. The leaders of the recall group are running for city council.
Of course they are. Under
the banner of let's return civility to our discourse. And of course, they were the ones who created the incivility to begin with. And we're looking for an effective response to that.
Yeah, that's a great question and a great well, first off, there is a major effort, well funded by the Republicans to move all of this MAGA type stuff from the national to the local, and so it's only going to get worse. Okay, next, consider that in general, that Republicans' favorite trick is to project. So they are not being civil, so they claim to be civil. Or going back, they're not fiscally responsible, so they claim to be. And you see this on issue after issue. They blunt our message by claiming what, our approach to it. And in this case, they're saying we're trying to bring civility back. Just because they've said that doesn't mean that you can't say exactly the same thing or call them out when they're, so this is civility, kind of thing. That's a way to do it. And again, as long as you are also speaking in a civil tone, of course, about the things that you care about and that matter to people. Because again, responding to them about this is keeping everyone in their frame. So, another way to put it is don't give them the satisfaction of noticing what they're saying and trying to counter it or rebut it. Move on with your message and be as civil as you can about it. I don't know. Does that help, Dave? Is that?
Well, in fact, that our message is that we are that we have that peace has returned as a result of the new police chief, and they have glommed onto our message, but with some success. They actually got a MAGA person just narrowly elected in a special to our city council a few days ago by 31 votes. So 16 votes would have made the difference.
Oh.
So it's working, and that has me, very concerned. They are giving the impression with some success that they are the ones who are going to solve the problem that they created. That helps. But we started out. We went from the gate with the same message, basically, that we were the ones who had restored the peace, restored civility, and we were this. So therefore, can't vote for us. They came out simultaneously with, no, we're the side that can do that.
Who came out with it first?
Both at the same time, because our paper required the answers to these questions be simultaneous. I was at a training the other day that was being given by the District 2 and CD2, and we talked a little bit about this. They didn't have a clear answer either to how one would approach this. We basically were all running on the same message of returning civility to the discourse, and it really essentially was simultaneous. It's unique. Any thoughts?
Well, one good thing is that civility is a good thing, and if both candidates are campaigning on it, that's a good deal. Now, the issue is going to be holding their feet to the fire when they prove not to be. Obviously, when everyone on your side is speaking, you want to be as civil as possible. You can certainly be somewhat controversial in a very civil way. Somebody skilled at rhetoric can create a message that asks a question or whatever that creates some of that. But if you're always the picture of civility, and the MAGA folks, some of them will have a hard time with civility and they'll be seen to be not civil. But beyond that, I'm not going to say that that's going to win you an election, because we're way, way behind the Republicans. They've been doing their messaging. They've been stealing our thunder, doing all of this for 4 to 5 well-financed decades. And we're behind, so much so that our leadership, some of our leadership, doesn't even get that they need to do this stuff. And it certainly is not part of our culture. So this is why the things that we talk about here are strategic, that as we put the kind of messages that we need to put out into the world, as we do that, the more we do it, more people will hear it and think about it. If we're not just throwing facts at them, we're saying why all this matters to all of us. That kind of thing over time will bring us back into dominance as we once were. And so that's why all of you are evangelists for this. Talk to your candidates. And if it helps here in Minnesota, and there are other states too that we can identify. I know there are people on here from Washington State. We have folks from Wyoming, Colorado, New York. If any pull that you've got with your state party, go for it. But also, those state parties have done some of this kind of training, and some of their leadership gets it. So make sure that this is a constant topic, that it comes up in conversation, that when people are saying, well, we need to do this, this, and this, and if they don't mention that we need to get our freaking messaging act together, then you mention it, because we're not going to solve this problem tomorrow, as much as that would be great to do, but we are going to solve it if we do this over time.
I'm just wondering, in response to Dave's very specific problem, around the word civility. And the fact that both sides are trying to use it, and then how do you then, who framed it first and that kind of thing. Can you have a message of civility without using the word civility? By saying things like, I care about, all the people in Mankato by wanting to do this. I care about women's right to control their own bodies. So not using that word, but just using messages of civility and just keep pounding that over and over again.
Yeah, sure. And also, we don't, we're not talking about it here, but it's also adopting a civil looking demeanor, and your actions, your words. If you appear to be a civil person, a friendly person, because that's very powerful. If you're friendly and you speak to people in terms they understand, if you don't, if you again avoid all of the nitty gritty and you just talk about why this is important for people, Bernie's good at it, Elizabeth Warren's good at it, Robert Reich is good at it. There are a lot of good people out there who do this, and you talk that way and you'll be seen as a civil person. These MAGA people will eventually show their, they're just getting crazier all the time. I mean, they're so far off the deep end. It's amazing. And they are getting violent and angry, and that will show through. And then since they campaigned on civility, people will see you being the civil one. So
is there a way to turn this around and remind the people that they were the ones who created the issue that they now are trying to solve? But it seems like Republicans have a habit of doing that. They'll create the problem and then they'll come back and say, we, I alone can fix it kind of thing. We're the one.
yeah,
Come to
exactly.
us.
Yeah. Republicans say that the government is broken, and then they get elected to prove it. So they get elected and break it. They basically break it, point to it, and say it's broken. So therefore, we shouldn't do this. But I would say, and again, choose your messenger. Okay, that's important. The candidate themselves may not always be the right messenger for this. And we see this a lot where there are groups, other groups that are making messages that would be too controversial for the candidate. But if on social media there was video of these very candidates being uncivil, and that
There we go.
That got out there, all of a sudden, people are saying, okay, well, if you really want civility, come take a look at our side.
I think you may have helped solve our problem, because many of them came to city council meetings and were very uncivil during the council meetings.
Yeah,
That might be the golden ticket. And of course, those council meetings are all on tape. Whether I don't know, the extent to which we can, edit those snippet those and use them. I'm not sure of the legality of that at this moment, but that might actually be you might have given us exactly what we need to keep the MAGA crowd from taking over our city council this year.
Luckily, in political speech, the reins are a little looser on what you're allowed to grab and use, even from news programs. But I'm not a lawyer. But if you're on social media, usually the worst that happens is somebody gets a takedown notice.
Opie has his hand up, so he might know the answer to that question.
I don't know if I know the answer. I am reminded that approach didn't work with Trump. And I'm also reminded of a conversation, quote unquote, that my two grandsons had recently, which is, "You're a jerk." "No, I'm not. You're a bigger jerk." And it doesn't lead anywhere in the process. So I think, Lisa, to your point, the pivot to demonstration of our values will speak more than trying to say, it feels good to call Trump a jerk, but every time I do, I emphasize Trump in the process. And every time I say somebody else is uncivil, I'm being perceived in part as complaining about something or that. And so I'd be very careful about that, to counter to what you're saying, George. I'm not convinced it works.
I think that's a valid counter because, and again, you are repeating what the Republicans are saying, and
Yeah. Well, they don't have a positive message, and they usually talk about values around here, and they did not, and we did. I've learned enough over the years to include our values for all of our candidates, and they have chosen not to. I mean, we've got a few ins here and there, but a few things these are not great sophisticated candidates either, but I think they're probably getting a little bit of help. So anyway, thank you.
No, I get it. And remember, virtually all of your time should be spent on your messages. And so that, if that helps.
Okay,
Let's
so
take
thank
one more question and I'll move through Dave.
Yeah, hi. My question is about your Venn diagram. And my observation has been that a large number of Democrats seem to think that little piece in the middle is actually much bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And those two circles, in other words, are much closer together. And there's this big voting block of moderates that don't want anything to do with the left. And of course, the right are nut jobs. And it seems so out of whack, because how many Democrats and how many even independents wouldn't want to raise the minimum wage, to have affordable, high quality health care for all, to expand Social Security, to invest in affordable housing, to tax the rich. But Democrats they get into this moderate, we got to be in the middle. We got to be this moderate voice of reason and pragmatic. And it's not getting us anywhere. It hasn't gotten us anywhere for the last 40 years. And
Move this to the right.
Yeah, and it's caused us to get farther and farther behind. It's like we can't call these guys out for the charlatans they are, for fear that I don't know what the fear is. It's almost as if the tail is wagging the dog. And our members of Congress, whether it be Dean Phillips for me and Tina and Amy, are so measured in their approach to not emphasize that these bold ideas are really what would help everybody. It's like, I would think rural Minnesota would jump all over most of this stuff.
And when you ask people, they do.
Yeah.
On many, many of these issues, people want, there's a circle missing from the Venn diagram. And it's we were talking worldviews there, but you could put another circle in there, and those are people who do not have a well-formed worldview. They're not picking and choosing from one side or the other in any real thoughtful way or any deep way. They just really aren't, they're people who have lives to live, and they're not interested in politics, or they're intimidated by it because they know they don't know all about it. I mean, I'm not a sports guy. And when I sit down with a bunch of people, a bunch of guys who are, they'll start talking sports. I go get another beer because I just feel like I can't even take part in the conversation. But, some people feel intimidated by that. And so they stay out of all of this. And so they don't have a well-formed political worldview. This is an opportunity for us to get in there and say things in simple ways, not simplistic ways, but simple ways that talk about our values, that talk about how people's lives are affected by what it is that happens in the political world. And I'd say the proof of this, before I move on to the last two slides, is you look at the conservatives in the rural areas who said, yep, Trump's my man, but I kind of like Bernie too. And that happened. You can't find two people in this country further apart, in office. So anyway, thanks for that, Dave. All right, let me go back here because we're getting on 8 o'clock and I want to just finish these slides here. Okay, let me pop a different slide up. We kind of talked, I didn't talk the truth sandwich, but that was all in talking about countering your opponent's messages, and we kind of just did that. So this here is this is what I'm calling pre-capitulation in anticipation of an attack, or put it another way, defending against an argument your opponent has not yet made, or that the listener has not yet heard. Now, normally you see this as a mailer that shows up in your mailbox that says, my opponent says, or the MAGA crowd says, and in bold letters across the top, it has their message. Then in an overlong paragraph under it is a list of facts. And let me show you something that came from the DCCC. I'm picking on them tonight only because they got me really mad last week. You'll tell you why in a moment. But here you see, this came out a few years ago, and it was came out before Thanksgiving. And yeah, it pretty much went to people who, are active, not necessarily out in the public, but it sure could get out in the public. So what do you see here? And the idea is there are different meals that your family's giving you. And so these are our buns talking here. And here are 3 conservative messages or MAGA messages sprawled across the top in the most obvious place with the fancy graphic. And so here what's happened is we think we're going to get attacked. So we go ahead and we name what those attacks are. So now maybe somebody didn't know that, that some of these things, like humans can't have that much of an impact. Well, now there's a nice brand new idea for somebody to stick in their head that they can repeat somewhere. We don't want them repeating it. And this is a D-trip thing. And then below it is what they believe to be messaging advice. And what are all of those things? There are 4 facts. There's not a why in there anyway. There's not a reason why anyone should care about global warming. So so you have to be careful in what you do. This kind of goes back to mentioning your opponent's position and giving it some credence. It's kind of the same thing. You just don't do this. It's not helpful. Let me bring up, because we're kind of running out of time, but what there is, let me find it here. Okay. There are errors of organization. And I'm going to start with this one. I have a few more, but I'm also going to send this script out, and there's a little more in the script than I had planned to do here tonight, and also some things that I planned to do that we didn't get to. But here's one error of organization, and this is where we spend our money. And because I'm just got a thing out for the D-trip right now, I'm going to say this. I may get pushback, but let me ask this question. What could we have done to fix our messaging problems with, say, just $4 million of the $43 million? Oh, the thing rang, the bell went off. I'll say it again. The $43 million, the DCCC, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, people responsible for getting House members elected at the U.S. House, $43 million they spent supporting Trump candidates in the recent primary. Or to put it another way, $43 million to grease the skids for the extremists to spread even more bullshit with our money, with the money that Democrats have raised, going up. Why did they do this? Apparently they thought by getting MAGA people elected or through the primary, they'd be easier to beat. The last time we all thought that, we got Trump. I'm on my high horse here, but I'm also making a comparison between that $43 million, which is a considerable sum, and $4 million, which really would go a long way, or at least be a good start on allowing groups like ours and ASO Communications and I'm blanking out all the names, all the other people who do what we do, to actually get out and make this kind of training nationwide so all Democrats get it. And the other thing is let's also think about the many state and federal campaigns in places that the DCCC does not often support, because they think these regions, and we've seen mainly rural, are regions we're just not going to win. And all of those campaigns could have used 43 million to run well-messaged campaigns in areas that Democrats really need to win strategically. The lesson here is that it's an incumbent upon us as party leaders to not support the people who make these kind of decisions and others who do not understand or even deny that we need to get our messaging act together. If what we've been telling you makes any sense at all, we want you to be evangelists for this cause. And we support people for party office who will change the culture of the D-TRIP and other party organizations, or even in some of your states, if they're not into this, like ours is in Minnesota, very supportive. If we don't do this, we're never going to get ahead of the GOP, no matter how extreme they get. We see living proof. There is nothing that they can do that will cause their supporters to turn away from them. Donald Trump literally really could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue in New York City and get away with it at this point. I mean, certainly his supporters would still support it. So there's that. We did hit 8 o'clock. Let me just see if there was another. There are a few others here. I'll just mention one other, which is in our organizations, and some of our electeds and leaders say we don't have a messaging problem. And this is something that is something we should not be saying. I'm not sure where it comes from. Maybe it's the people who think messaging is a weak thing to do, or maybe because they believe we've already put all the facts out there for everybody to see, and so everybody should just believe us. Or we just have to work harder at something else. So like it usually comes in the form of, we don't have a messaging problem. What we really need to do is blank. Now, I'm not sure why anyone has the idea that messaging and blank are mutually exclusive, but in any case, you know, minimizing messaging and denying that we have a messaging problem hurts us, because we do indeed have a significant messaging problem, nicely exemplified by those who say we don't. So I thought I'd just maybe end on this rant. I don't often rant. Well, I sometimes rant, but I kind of went overboard here today. But anyway, let me stop sharing. For those who need to leave, that's great. Otherwise, we usually hang in there and I'll answer more questions. So if there's anybody else who has questions, now I can make my screen bigger and see people. That's cool. There we go.
I have one again.
Yeah, Dave.
How would you have recreated that DCCC ad that you did not like? What would you have done to make to send home the message? How would you have handled that?
I first off would not have done either the top part or the bottom part. I would have said, what are the issues that are important to us? What are the issues that are important to voters? What is that? And when you're, or even because the intent of this was to give Democrats a way of dealing with the Thanksgiving problem. All of us have it. You go to Thanksgiving dinner, your crazy Uncle Paul is off on his MAGA rant, and how do you deal with that? There are some ways that you can talk to Uncle Paul that will allow him to maybe shut up for a moment and consider your ideas. A lot of that is based on, for example, making that personal connection. You know, Uncle Paul, you've always been one of my favorite uncles, and I know we disagree about this, but I know you love me. You can, will you listen to what I have to say on this? And then or you can just launch right into it and say, here's how I look at it, and I'm sure you'll listen to me on this because I know you care about me. And then you go on, and there are other things like that that can be used. That would have been helpful. That might have actually planted a seed, again, because messaging is strategic. That's something that Democrats don't get overall in a general way. We're not strategic. Then, by doing this and talking to crazy Uncle Paul and telling him some of these things, we're not going to turn him tonight. But some of these ideas are ideas he's never heard before. Republicans have been throwing the same crap out for 40 to 50 years, the same messaging. It's never occurred to a lot of these people that there's any other way to really think about it. And if you, a person that they care about, is giving them an alternative way to look at it. You might not win them today, but you planted a seed in Uncle Paul's brain that just might come up next time he's talking to his buddies and say, you know, yeah, I hear you on that. I got to tell you this thing that my niece said. And it goes off.
How do we make climate change emotional so that they'll remember it, so that it, I was thinking we should make it about the future instead of those, maybe there should have been 3 babies at the top or something like that, talking about, you know, the, I don't know, the future. And it's just the kind of messaging I'm you know, grasping at, trying to do, talking about, you know, making it emotional, talking about the future, talking about the kids, because everybody wants a better life for their kids.
Bingo.
That's, you know, any thoughts?
Sounds like you're doing really well. That's exactly what you should do. And yeah, I mean, you know, make it that is called future projection. So the taking what we've got and saying, okay, what will this be like in the near future? You know, the book that I've been talking about that some of us here are reading is very interesting, you know, look at one possible future of where we go with climate change, but throughout the book, it is also interspersed with chapters. There's like 140 chapters. Many of them are very short, and they are kind of I'm dating myself, but a Marshall McLuhan way of looking at this, where there are chapters that are reports for a company about something that where climate change is affecting them, people in a particular place dealing with flooding, and there's a lot of this. So you see all that. Anytime you can make real in somebody's brain a visualization of what the future is and what can happen is always good, because it's a story. Now it's a made up story, and that's fine because you're talking about the future.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're talking about the past and other things, you don't want to make up stories. You want to hear stories from people who experience the stories, make sure they're always truthful. But in the future, you have this great ability to paint a picture and paint that picture. And you know what? That's going to stick in people's heads, and not just crazy Uncle Paul, but it is also going to stick in the heads of everybody else who's passing around the mashed potatoes. Because you know, this is best done when you have an audience. And at Thanksgiving, you've got an audience.
Right.
So,
but it seems to me that Uncle Paul loves his grandkids, and that's a place to start. I don't want to dominate the conversation any further, but you know, and so that I don't know. Then what the other side does very often is what you mentioned earlier is they just ask a question. They just ask a provocative question and they don't answer it.
Yep,
and so
we can do the same.
Yes.
And,
So,
but also you can, you know, the advantage you have, you know, normally with everybody, you want to make a personal conversation about things that everybody cares about. In this case, you already have somebody who cares about you, so you're going to be able to speak so others can listen, and you might even put something in Uncle Paul's brain. Tom,
in my case, he just puts up with me, but he loves his grandkids. Yeah.
So Tom, you had a question. I'm sorry.
Well, not so much a question, but a comment to Dave. And what I've done with some letters to the editor and other framing is I use the frame of future generations and what we're doing now and how it will affect my grandkids, because I personally have 2 grandkids now, and I want to be sure that they have the ability to make choices in the future. And if we choose certain paths that we have today, they may not be able to make choices anymore. And I think that's the point, that by projecting to the future, and if you talk about your grandkids, as a lot of people on this video call tonight have probably got grandkids or close to that, and it's a matter of our future generations. And if you take the approach that the Native Americans did, they made decisions based on 7 generations. Wow. And so that's something that you can frame, and you can talk about it from your heart, what it means. And I think that's important.
And if you live in a city like we do, where our demographics match where the United States is going to be in the near future, we have many different ethnic groups. And it turns out, again, something I learned from this book is that the our first peoples, our Native Americans, are not the only ones who have this value. It turns out that it shows up in many other cultures. And so you might be talking to, for example, here in Minnesota, we have a large Hmong population, very community oriented, very family oriented. That kind of message is going to go over really well with them and with a lot of other cultures. So, maybe as we message, remember that when you're speaking to people from other cultures, that this may be something that resonates. It'd be great if it resonates more amongst all us pasty old white people. So
frame it as a generational issue. So am I catching you guys correctly? We frame this as we need to think about this. Uncle Paul needs to think about this very long term. What kind of world is grandchildren going to live in, kind of thing.
yeah.
George,
Against each other.
George, I'm sorry, Virginia, and I'm butting in. I want to take a slightly contrarian view. I absolutely
That's
identify.
why we need you, Hobie.
I absolutely identify with the empathy I have for my grandkids. Okay, just because I have that feeling doesn't mean everyone will share it. And I'm reminded a little of the George Lakoff moral hierarchy, where it's God above man, man above woman, man above children, and you go down there. And there actually have been some studies that say when you say do it for future generations, that you don't activate anybody sort of in the middle. And I would look at, and instead, one thing that has about a 15% differential in conversion is restoring the environment, which is a retroactive and conservative stewardship kind of narrative that would work. And so if we're going to do it for our kids, we should be doing it in the terms of not what they're facing, but restoring it, a backward-looking kind of narrative there. The narratives that I think we can tell are a justice narrative around climate. We can tell a natural world narrative, which is a story about the beauty of nature. We can tell one of stewardship. We can tell one of health, and we can tell one of faith
and freedom,
and freedom. And so, to me, the best way to have those conversations is, so many times when I go do it for my kids, I'd rather tell a story about my kids and what they're experiencing than I would trying to rationalize it by the future generation. And I can give you an example, but I don't know that we have time. I'm sorry to butt in there, but
no, that's cool. And what that does is actually put people into it. Future generations is a nebulous term. My grandson is not a nebulous term. Is that what you were getting at? Was there an example you wanted to throw in there, Hobie?
Yeah, the one that I think about is driving on the freeway down here in Atlanta and taking my grandson to a soccer game, and him, looking ahead and thinking, God, that truck is putting out a lot of smoke. We're stuck in traffic. We're going about 2 miles an hour. And the next sound I hear is Ian is wheezing, and he's got asthma. And I look down and I haven't turned off I haven't got the recirculate air on. I got air coming in from the outside. And so I turn on the recirculate, I turn on the air conditioner, and I said, did you bring your inhaler? And he goes, no. And I said, well, we'll be okay. I don't want to panic him or anything like that. But we're like stuck in a cattle ramp. Can't get off. And he's getting worse. And so finally I squeeze in between two trucks. I get off and we get to the ER. And while he's getting treatment, I look around the room and there's 5 other kids in there with respirators on. My grandson's the only white kid there. The rest are black. And I asked the doctor, and what's going on? And she said, at this time of day, 4 in the afternoon, it's when the pollution is the worst. these kids are stuck next to the freeway in their homes because they built the freeway right through
Of
the
course.
neighborhood. And, you know, they're, I think, 10 times more likely to get asthma and twice as likely to die. And I just thought, what the hell is wrong with us? I mean, my grandson's here, but these are our kids, and it's happening now, and there's no reason it has to happen, because we can have clean transportation, we can have mass transit, and we don't have to drive everywhere in this process. And that's why I work on clean transportation in my community. So what I'm telling you is a story. I'm not giving you a lot of facts, and that actually happened to me. And I feel passionate about that, because I don't care, as Americans, I don't care what color we are. I don't care where we come from, what our heritage is, where we work. We deserve to be able to breathe clean air into our lungs. And that's just it. Now, that's an example of a health narrative, but it's also tied to kids as an example. So thank you.
If all of you want more of that truly excellent messaging and framing, skywaterearth.com, skywaterearth.com is Hobie's website, and no one's better at it. Yeah, he's
Thanks.
not just climate, but lots of other things too. He's quite adept at this. Yeah, that's the way to tell a future story. You know, and that's not even the future. So,
And Ginny,
I was just, because, you know, the last couple of years in Minnesota, and I think elsewhere in the country too, we've really seen, you know, the drought conditions. And my husband and I live in the country a little bit, and we have a well, and we just had our well serviced last week, someday, whatever. And I asked the guy, I said, is the, you know, what are the well levels? And he goes, they're all down all around the metro. And, but he said, yours isn't dangerously down, and then, just yesterday, my brother, who's a big Trump guy, Fox News guy, and we've had many arguments, but anyway, he, came over, and I was talking about the drought, and he said, there's no drought. And I said, yes, watch the news. And I mean, just any news station, you watch the weather, they talk about the drought. I mean, and he's like, there's no drought. Look at the corn. It's just fine. Look at the grass. Everything's, and I just was, you know, just, I don't know. I can't imagine that the local Fox stations aren't talking about the drought, but maybe they're not. It just blows my mind. And I said, well, you know, anyway, so the point is that sometimes even when you're talking about, you can't even agree that there is a frickin' drought. So
and you know, the funny thing with that, and I'm not sure if he lives around here, but you don't even need the news to tell you that. All you have to do is look with your own eyes and see everybody's grass is burned out. And I mean,
yeah, well, you know, what's interesting. Oh, go ahead, Jenny. I'm sorry.
no, my brother-in-law lives in Minnetonka, but it just was, the other brother-in-law said there is a drought. So he agreed with me, but you know, it just blows my mind, you know.
Yeah. Well, you know, these things are becoming, you know, I mean, at some point, some people will pick up on it because, you know, many more wildfires, many more floods, hurricanes, you know, heat waves, which are very dangerous. The wet bulb temperature that is featured in that book is a measure of that. And we're not far from having the kinds of heat waves that are going to kill many, many more people. Not everybody has air conditioning, and lots of people work outside. And so there's that, but yeah, so, well, this has been fun. Any other questions?
I have a comment.
Oh, I'm sorry, Carol.
Yeah, I just want to jump in real quick because I liked your line about plant a seed to change a mind. And some of the phraseology around, like, what about if we run out of water? What about if we don't educate all kids? What about, and just plant that, just push with a question is really, you know, sort of an approach that doesn't have, you don't have to spew a fact. You just have to say, what if we educated all kids?
Yeah.
What if we, you know, cleaned the air? What if we made sure the water was clean and safe for everyone everywhere. What about that? And it gets people to at least start to head towards thinking about it, if anything. So I love that, the whole notion of plant a seed. So make
Yeah,
somebody
and
think.
it's a metaphor.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's handy. And
Yeah.
and yeah, I mean, asking questions is can be very powerful, especially if you include in that, how will our children live in the future? How well will they live if we make sure that they're all educated? And you can use another metaphor, by the way. Brain cells are a national resource. Every brain cell that is out there is potentially a brain cell that could contribute or participate in the generation of the knowledge that cures cancer, or makes a 95% efficient solar cell, or whatever, a better battery. It reminds me of one of the things that was it wasn't the NAACP, it was the college, the United Negro College Fund from way back, where they said a mind is a terrible thing to waste. And that kind of thinking about that, anytime you can put it in those terms. And asking questions are great, because you haven't told somebody something and then suggested they're wrong about it. You just ask the question.
And Sue, you said you had something you wanted to say or ask?
Yeah, I just want to jump on Hobie's bandwagon. I don't deal too much in the future, because I think with climate change, we have so many examples of what's happening right now that people can take a look at. Within our own state, and it's not going to be very long before our state loses some of its trees, many of its animals, or things are going to be moving north. And that's in the very near future. But I think we can start focusing on what's actually happening today that people can relate to.
On this particular topic, one thing that is interesting is that there are people who get exactly what's happening and know the very nitty-gritty details on it, because their insurance companies, their home insurance companies and business insurance companies have to know this stuff. And I don't know if it's happening right now in Florida, but I sure would bet that, if you can still get insurance, it's a lot more expensive than it used to be.
Yeah.
And I think that will continue to happen. That people will start seeing this show up in their pocketbooks more and more. Especially your summer air conditioning is going to go up.
George, there was a thing several years ago, but it was Paul. Is Paul Majors the climatologist? Is that I
No,
think
Paul Douglas.
Paul Douglas.
Yeah.
Paul, I'm sorry.
A
But it was
conservative, by the way.
Yes, but he's really into the whole climate change thing and trying to figure it out. And but it was a Science Museum of Minnesota seminar, and they were talking about that very thing, about how the actuarial tables and just the whole insurance thing with climate change. It's definitely, it's already happening. The premiums and everything are going up. So.
Well, I'm really glad everybody was here tonight. I know I threw a lot at you. Questions were really good. I always like that when that happens. And the contributions of others have been wonderful. So a couple last questions. I see Dave and Hobie. Let's take those questions and then we'll go. Dave?
Well, I'm trying to figure out a great way to talk about for our candidates running for office this year, because I'm helping a number of them. So would it benefit us to be talking about our vision for the future? Are we going down the right path when we're saying things like, my vision for the future includes a restored environment? It sounds like my takeaway from this might be that kind of a message. What are your thoughts?
I'll let Hobie answer that.
Thanks, George. Actually, Dave, I've been working with a number of Senate candidates on exactly that thing, on trying to improve their climate messaging. And since George opened this on, framing mistakes, I think one of the dangers, I'd like to say that the climate movement is failing in part because we're using facts and reasons and trying to convince people. And that the other thing that I hear a lot about from climate activists is, yes, Minnesota temperatures are going to raise 7 degrees Fahrenheit. And the winters are going to increase by 11 degrees Fahrenheit. Isn't that awful? And what we don't realize is that doomism is a tool of the fossil fuel industry and those denying climate. And to a large extent, doomism has become the new climate denial. And so I think it is important to, use the value sandwich, state your values. The idea that as an American, regardless, again, of the color of our skin, where we come from, or how we make a living, we all deserve to be able to breathe clean air into our lungs and drink clean water and have a safe future for our children. And then frame it as, the opposition, who's trying to violate those values. But there are a few CEOs of fossil fuel companies and the politicians that they keep in their pockets that are trying to divide us and think that it's our responsibility entirely and that they bear no responsibility for damaging our climate. And then state our vision. We believe that we can move to clean energy. We can have a clean environment and a strong economy, that we are going to be generating more jobs than any other sector in the history of the United States. Now's the time for all of us to come together to demand that we continue to improve the climate here in Minnesota. A positive statement. So I think you're onto it in part. I like to start with the values, but I also like to identify and I put a post up there that as liberals, we don't like to say bad things about others. And all right, that's fine. That's sort of like trying to agree with the opposition and state their argument first so that they'll like us. But we can say that their ideas are old, tired, bankrupt, fraught. They don't bring anything to the table. And when we think about conservatives and liberals here, liberals are the people you want in office to do things when your back is against the wall, because we get stuff done. So positive statements that way. I don't know, I'm on a rant. But I'd be glad to talk to your candidates. I got a little half-hour kind of thing that I do if you're interested, George.
Highly recommended.
One brief thing,
Yeah.
and someone once said, "Stay away from we believe," and say, "I envision a future where."
Yes,
And basically,
yeah, that's fine.
Okay,
Imagine if, yeah.
okay,
Yes,
thank you.
All right, everybody. Thanks a whole lot. This was fun tonight. And
Very helpful for me. So
we'll
thank
have
you very
some-
much.
Okay.
And we'll
yeah.
get a follow-up email out to you within the next day or two. So we'll be looking for that. It'll have a recording and a bunch of links and that kind of thing.
And more trainings, I hope.
Oh, yeah,
More,
we're working on our September and October trainings now, so we'll get that information out to you too.
Yeah, those may be more practical for get out the vote and such. So,
Perfect.
okay.
Great.
All right, folks.
Thank you.
See
Thank
y'all.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. connectionslab.org